So, Mr. Varoufakis, and North Macedonia has signed the Prespa Agreement, changed its name, the constitution, to enter NATO and the EU. 3 years later, we are still waiting to enter the European Union. Now we have another veto, Bulgarian veto. What is your opinion? Why are those so many delays of the enlargement on the Balkans?
I hope you allow me to say that even though I was very much and remain very much in favor of the agreement, the way in which the question was posed in your referendum, I think, is highly problematic for a democracy. The question, yes, do you want to get into the EU and NATO, and then in small print underneath, which means agreement with Greece on Prespes, that's offensive to democracy. The question should be, are you in favor of the agreement with Greece? And then there should be another question, another referendum. Do you want to get into the EU? Do you want to get into NATO? This kind of abuse of democratic process, it's something we experience here in Greece. This is not a criticism of North Macedonia, right? I mean, we see it everywhere. A complete disregard of democratic procedures. Let me come to your question now. My understanding is that they were initially, not now with Bulgaria, but when France and Holland had objections. That was all to do with corporate interests that wanted more guarantees about access to your country. You see, this is the problem. I'm a Europeanist. I'm in favor of the European Union. But I'm highly critical of the European Union because we were meant to be a union of peoples, of democracies. But in the end, we operate like a cartel of big business that in the end decide behind closed doors questions like the accession of North Macedonia on the basis of particular interests of particular corporations. So I think it is the duty of the citizens of North Macedonia, of Greece, of France, of the Netherlands, to take control of the European process, of the democratic process, and make clear to big business that they are not going to be ruling the roost anymore. I do suspect that in the end, North Macedonia is going to be admitted to the European Union. It's something I personally want to see from the perspective of bringing together Europeans. But I do not want to see it as part of a process whereby the people of North Macedonia, the people of Greece, the people of Italy become effectively the peasants of a new feudalism ruled by big corporations.
We'll talk about that a little bit later, but tell me, you mentioned that there were some corporate interests. Are those interests still present, or still on power? What kind of interests are? Can you tell us more? In France and in Holland, like 2 years ago.
I believe in speaking frankly, so I will answer your question frankly.
That's what I expect.
They were Dutch and French conglomerates that wanted to secure privileged access to the North Macedonian market before giving the green light to the accession of North Macedonia. This is unacceptable.
Have they got that?
I'm not sure.
We are still out of EU.
We will see.
We will see. But North Macedonia is such a small country, it's very, very, very small market. So it's hard for us to see there in the interest of big powers. Here.
Well, you know what they say. You gather a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and you create a conglomerate. Conglomerates have gone to war over very small markets. They have destroyed small countries for a few $1 million. It has been known,
So it's possible. But you also criticize the European Union about its response of the pandemic with the COVID-19. North Macedonia was one of the countries who really believed Brussels and waiting for a long time for vaccines to come. And we started vaccinations with Chinese vaccines. I mean, we got now, after 6 months, the European.
It's a fiasco. It's a complete fiasco.
Why? Why it happened?
2 reasons. On the one hand, it's corruption, and on the other hand, it's incompetence. I'll be very clear when I say corruption. The decision to procure vaccines centrally was a correct one. this is how it should happen. We should buy vaccines collectively and then distribute them across the European Union equally. And so the principle was correct. I'm not criticizing the principle. What I do criticize is the fact that Brussels distributed the contract between a German company, BioNTech, they ordered 300 million vaccines, and a French one, Sanofi, another 300 million vaccines. This French-German axis is absolutely inconsistent with the idea of equality, of equal opportunity, of a single market. And yet, Brussels continues to divide the pie between the two major powers that decide everything. Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen is the president of the Commission. She's a failed defense minister of the German government, and the only reason why we have her in Brussels as the president of the European Commission is because Mr. Macron and Mrs. Merkel, behind closed doors, decided she's going to be it. And she's been abysmal in the way she's handled the vaccination situation. So Sanofi did not produce vaccines, and we were left with a major gap in our vaccination process. That's number one. Number two is the incompetence of the Brussels bureaucracy negotiating contracts. I read the contract that they had with AstraZeneca, and it's indefensibly incompetent. Effectively, it did not bind AstraZeneca to anything. It left to AstraZeneca's goodwill whether they're going to supply the European Union with vaccines or not. So it's a combination of corruption and incompetence. And that combination, for me, is the result of the lack of democracy in Brussels. There is no accountability. Your prime minister you can get rid of. There's an election process, you have a parliament, you can get rid of your prime minister. How can we get rid of Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen? We cannot. We did not choose her. None of us voted for her. She was chosen by two people behind closed doors, and we can't get rid of her.
But you have a European Parliament, you have
what
all
can the European Parliament do? Nothing.
Member countries.
Yeah, but
Other
what can the member countries
20...
do? They cannot do nothing. There is no process by which to get rid of Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, unlike your prime minister, my prime minister, right? So there is a complete lack of democracy in the European Union, which breeds corruption and incompetence.
I will go back to my country. How North Macedonia should find to get out of this situation? I mean, this veto, like the previous, the Greek veto, means that should be consensus in the European Union to decide those countries to enter. Do you see any danger, like other countries to interfere, like Russia, Turkey, China, more on the Balkans, because we are left behind?
Look, I think that we should work this one out at the level of the European Union. That Russia wants to interfere, it does. That Turkey wants to interfere, it does. China wants to interfere, I don't know. I don't know who else wants to interfere. But we should work this one out. The people of Northern Macedonia were made a promise by the European Union. That promise must be fulfilled. End of story. If this means that there has to be a summit with the Bulgarian government being called upon to find some kind of compromise with Skopje, with your government, right? We should do it. But it should become a matter of honor that a promise is a promise. Maybe the promise should not have been given, but it was given. So let's move on. Let's move on with it now.
Mm-hmm. So there is no much we can do. Just wait. But waiting can disappoint. Can you understand how huge is the disappointment?
Of course I can understand that. And let me say that our party is not just another Greek party. We belong to a pan-European movement, DiEM25. We have members in Northern Macedonia who are our comrades, and they vote for things that we do in Germany, in Greece, and so on. We're a very unique movement in that. I'm saying this because I want to signal my commitment to a process of genuine convergence, genuine getting together that must not be impeded by corporations, by geopolitics, and by whatever happens behind closed doors without the consent of anyone. Not the people of North Macedonia, not the people of France, not the people of the Netherlands even.
After the pandemics, many people lost their jobs. What do you think, how the recovery of economy will last? What will happen? Shall we have another crisis?
Well, you see, since 2008 was for me the pivotal moment. The pandemic has reinforced and accelerated and deepened the crisis that began in 2008. We're still living in the wake of that huge crisis of 2008, a crisis that we have not overcome, a crisis that sunk the financial sector of the West, precipitating the refloating of bankers by central banks. The central banks in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Japan and so on, they've been refloating the banks. Why am I saying that? Because on the one hand you've got trillions and trillions of dollars and euros being printed by central banks. That money goes to private banks. The private banks, large private banks, not small private banks, mostly Deutsche Bank, Société Générale and so on, they lend it to the large corporations that are too scared to invest because they can look at the little people who don't have enough money to spend. So what those corporations do with the money that they got from the central bank via a private bank is they go to the stock exchange and buy back their own shares. So the stock exchanges are doing really very well, the financial markets are doing fantastically, the wealthy get even richer, but they're not producing anything. They're not investing in good quality green jobs, which is what North Macedonia needs, what Greece needs, what Germany needs. So you have this amazing irony. Socialism for the bankers and austerity for everyone else, stagnation for everyone else. Then you have the pandemic coming in, making things far worse. And what do? Same thing. The central bank prints even more money. Since the pandemic began in the European Union, the Central Bank of Europe has printed 2 trillion euros and given it to the banks, that gave it to the corporations, that took it to the stock exchanges. This money is not filtering through to small businesses anywhere in Europe. So we have a crisis that started in 2008, the pandemic exacerbated it, and this crisis is creating immense wealth for those who are not doing anything. They're not producing, they're not contributing with the green transition that we need to fight climate change, to create good quality jobs for young people. So they're getting richer and everybody else is stagnating. This is the situation we are in, especially in the European Union. Every crisis we have had in Europe in the last 20, 30 years has left Europe weaker compared to China, compared to the United States, compared to India, compared to the rest of the world. And as a Greek and a Greek politician, I would like to invite our friends in Northern Macedonia to join the struggle to reverse this process, to create a process whereby money printed on behalf of everyone is used in order to create good jobs for young people and to empower the weak, not to empower the rich and the powerful.
You're saying that capitalism is dead and now we have techno-feudalism. Could you explain what that means?
I realize that this is a major claim, but you remember, of course you remember, because you come from that part of the world, that in 1991 socialism died. My view is that in 2008 capitalism died. In 2008. It's not as dramatic as it was in the socialist countries, former so-called socialist countries, but it is pretty dramatic. If you think about it, capitalism is meant to be a system that is driven by profit, by private profit. Capital accumulation, as Marx used to say, right? Or profits. And markets. That's gone. What drives capitalism today, this thing that we still call capitalism, is central bank money, state money. Since the pandemic, the central banks of the Western developed countries have printed $9,000 billion. $9,000 billion they printed since the pandemic began. Okay, this is the force that's keeping business going, financial markets going, stock exchanges going, banks going. That's not private profit. If you look at profitability, zero. You know, you have companies that have zero profitability and whose stock price is going through the roof. Even companies like Amazon that are profitable because they're monopolies, and the pandemic helped them a lot. Even they don't have that much profit, very little profit. Jeff Bezos is becoming hugely rich because the value of his shares is going through the roof, but not profit. So two things are missing from the system we have today. One is we no longer have profit, private capital accumulation, as the engine driving the system. That's an essential aspect of capitalism which no longer exists.
So what we have?
Central banks. Mrs. Lagarde in Frankfurt, you know, the Federal Reserve in the United States, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of Switzerland, the Bank of Sweden, the Bank of England. They keep printing money and refloating finance at the expense of real production. So that's one thing missing. The second thing that's missing is markets. Because, you see, we have a new beast. Amazon, Facebook, Google. These are not like the big companies of yesteryear. You see, since the 1900s, we had these large companies. So the idea of the small business-based capitalism has gone a long time ago. We had Thomas Edison, we had Henry Ford, we had IBM, we had ExxonMobil, the large corporations that cornered the market. But, you know, it's very different to say that you have a monopoly. Yeah? In your town, if there is a monopolist, gringo or a grocer, they sell vegetables, right? And there's no one else. So that's not a good thing because prices are high, the quality is not that great. But this is not what we have with Amazon. The moment you enter Amazon.com or .Deutschland or .co.uk, whatever, Amazon, you exit capitalism. You're outside of capitalism. Imagine, it's the equivalent. Imagine if we were to step outside now, only to realize that every single building belongs to one person. Every shop belongs to one person. Everything that is bought or sold in the city we're walking at is controlled by one person. That one person owns the air we breathe, the soil we walk on, the bench on which we sit to have a break. That this same person controls what we see. If he doesn't want us to see something, we don't see it. This is what happens in Amazon.com. One person decides all that. That's not capitalism, that's not a marketplace, it's not even monopoly. This is feudalism. Because only under feudalism did one person, the lord, own the estate, including the house in which the peasants lived. Even back then they didn't have so much power. And this is, of course, based on digital platforms. So that's why I call it techno-feudalism. So the fact that you have, on the one hand, the system being driven by state central bank money, not by profits, and you've got the end of markets, the sidelining, marginalization of markets and replacement by techno-fiefdoms, is what has led me to the conclusion, with some trepidation, because I know how radical this thought is, that we don't live under capitalism anymore. We have a completely different post-capitalist, not a very good one, you know, pretty dystopic system, which I call techno-feudalism.
Is there a way out?
Of course, there's always a way out.
What is the way out?
Well, on the one hand, we need to invest in things humanity needs. At the moment, the central bank money is wasted. It goes into higher share prices. Okay, we're not investing. I mean, in Europe, especially in the Balkans, we should have huge investments in electrification of transport, and of course, creating large distribution and production networks for renewable energy. We're not doing any of this. Very little, nothing really. There's no European Union energy union program that invests in all that. Even in Germany, they're still building lignite-powered electricity generating stations.
Yes, their green plants are for 10, for 20, for 30 years.
It's a joke. And you have all this money being produced by the central bank not being invested in these things, in good quality jobs for the youth of Northern Macedonia to stay in Northern Macedonia, not to migrate. Or here in Greece. We're not doing any of this. So we need to invest. You see, there is a paradox today in Europe. Never before have we had so much money in the history of Europe. We have a lot of money. Not you and me, or the people who are watching us, but if you look at the amount of money which is available in Europe, in the financial system. It's gigantic. We've never had so much money. And in comparison to this available cash, the level of investment is the lowest it has ever been. So clearly what we need is we need to take this money and invest it. There are ways of doing that. DM25, MENA25, we ran in the European Parliament elections with what we call the Green New Deal for Europe, where we explain how this could happen using the European Investment Bank, the European Central Bank. Technically, it's not hard. Politically, it's hard. So that's one thing we need to do. But secondly, we need to reconsider ownership. Who owns what? Because you see, every time you use your phone to check something on Google, or every time you carry your phone with you, because Google knows where you are, all right? That helps Google improve the quality of its maps, right? That is adding to the capital stock of Google. So you are contributing to the capital of Google, and so is everyone else, and not just Google. Every time you post something on Amazon, Facebook, and so on, you are adding to the capital stock of these corporations. So you should be a shareholder, since you are producing capital for them, but of course you are not. So you have a stringent and abysmal concentration of ownership of capital by those who are not producing it.
So we all should be owners, kind of.
In the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah, it reminds me about the socialism I used to live, and you know that collapsed, and it wasn't
but it
very
didn't
sustainable.
collapse because it was a bad idea. It collapsed because it was too early. And the digital technologies that we now have could help it. So let me give you a simple example of things we could do. We could say to large corporations, if you want to operate in the European Union, 10% of your shares must go into an equity fund. Since Europeans are contributing to your capital, 10% of the shares go to the Europeans. And the dividends accumulate, and everybody gets a universal basic dividend or income on the basis of that. And if you take this from 10% to 20%, 30%, you are socializing capital. Now, this can be done quite easily. You can have systems of participating in decision-making within corporations in order to give more voice to the very clever people working in those corporations who now have very little say in them. And that would bring you closer to a participatory management system, which is the basic idea of Yugoslavia, which, by the way, was exceptionally successful in the 60s and 70s and early 70s. People were actually writing PhD theses at MIT and in Harvard, extolling the participatory model in Yugoslavia. The reason why you collapsed was not because it was a bad model, but it was badly applied, and also because you took a lot of debt from foreign banks, which then exploded when interest rates went to 20%.
That was true. Thank you very much for the interview.
Well, thank you.